The room is small, windowless, packed with the sour, metallic smell of damp fear, the kind that clings to the back of the throat and refuses to leave. It's the same smell witnesses described lingering in the old punishment chambers of Imperial China, and tonight it rises again as we step into the life of a single woman, Lin Suyang, aged 23, accused of a crime she never confessed, a betrayal she never committed, and a silence she dared to maintain. They dragged her into the courtyard at dawn, wrists bound, hair tangled with dust, and yet what terrified her most wasn't the soldiers or the magistrate or even the wooden beam looming behind them. It was the smell, that damp old wood odor steeped with dried sweat and splintered history, the scent of women who came before her and never returned. This is where our story begins, with one woman's breath quivering, with one state's hunger for obedience, with one instrument so simple, so brutal, it didn't need blades or fire to break a body in half. The horse rack. A single beam shaped like a spine, a device that turned the human body into an argument and the empire's cruelty into a warning. What happened to Lin Suyang was not a spectacle. It was not a crime of passion. It was an administrative act committed with ink, ropes, and the smooth turning of a crank. And yet, its horror rivals anything born of war or vengeance, because the horse rack was designed with a cold purpose, to fracture a woman from the inside out while keeping her conscious long enough to confess something, anything, that made the state feel justified. But before the ropes tightened, before her limbs were dragged to opposite horizons, there was that smell. Damp fear. It hovered like a ghost around the wooden frame, clinging to the air in thick, invisible strands. Lin Suyang breathed it in, and her mind unraveled faster than her body ever could. This video will expose 3 truths, none of them comfortable. First, that torture in Imperial China was less about punishment and more about control. Second, that women paid the highest price for disobedience, real or imagined. And third, that systems built on fear do not disappear when kingdoms fall, they simply evolve. As the soldiers forced her forward, Lin Suyang's knees buckled, not from the pain, but from the realization that her name had already been erased. She was no longer a daughter, a wife, a weaver of silk. She was a message, a living warning to every other woman who might consider holding a secret, refusing an order, or loving outside the boundaries drawn for her. The horse rack awaited for her, like a patient predator. The executioners, dressed in gray that blended with the dawn light, worked without expression. They didn't shout, they didn't curse, they didn't need to. The creak of rope, the thud of heavy knots tightening, these were the only sounds that mattered. And beneath it all, weaving through the air like an old song, was that same smell of damp fear rising from the wood itself. When they stretched her across the beam, her back arched instinctively, muscles tightening in a desperate attempt to stay whole. She wasn't thinking about survival yet. She was thinking about breath, about balance, about how the world suddenly felt tilted, as if gravity had chosen sides. Somewhere behind the execution pit, the magistrate unfurled the scroll. The accusations were read calmly, almost politely. Adultery, concealment, refusal. None proven, all damning. Lin Suyang's heartbeat hammered loud enough to drown out the magistrate's words. The soldiers didn't hear it, but she did. And right beneath that pulse was that smell again, seeping deeper into her senses. Damp wood, damp fear, damp history. This is where the cruelty begins. Not with the stretching of limbs, but with the quiet realization that the system had already claimed her mind before it touched her body. And before we descend into how the torture worked and why the empire relied on agony as policy, pause with me, because stories like this survive only when someone chooses to witness them. If you want more investigations like this, dark, unfiltered, and unwilling to look away, then now is the moment to join us. Subscribe to Crimson Archive and stay with this story until the last splinter of truth is exposed. Because Lin Suyang's ordeal is only beginning, and the worst is still ahead. The horse rack did not roar or hiss or gleam like metal instruments from Western inquisitions. It was quiet. Too quiet. And perhaps that is why it worked so well. A single wooden beam, polished by sweat and time, shaped like the spine of a horse, but far less forgiving. Its silence amplified everything else. The tightening ropes, the trembling breaths, and always that clinging smell of damp fear rising from its grain. Lin Suying lay stretched across it, wrists bound to one side, ankles pulled toward the other. Her body curved into an unnatural bow, each inhale shallow, each exhale stolen. The executioners approached to crank, their hands steady, their expressions fixed. They had done this before, hundreds of times, and the routine nature of their movements was more terrifying than any brutality. One executioner placed his palm against a rope, feeling its tension. Another wiped a hand across the beam, as if brushing off invisible dust. But what he really brushed off was the lingering presence of the woman who had been torn on it before. That damp fear still clung to his skin, yet he didn't flinch. He never did. A magistrate's assistant read the protocol aloud. Calm, clinical, detached. Increase tension until the subject exhibits signs of moral surrender. Such a polite phrase for a method crafted to rip a woman apart from the inside. Then, the crank turned. Once. A small tightening, barely noticeable to an observer. But to Lin Suyang, it was lightning. Her ribs shifted, her chest compressed, her hips widened against her own joints. A sharp internal tear fluttered across her pelvis like a knife made of air. Her mind reeled, and still, that smell of damp fear pressed into her nose, gluing itself to her breath. The motive behind this wasn't mystery. The empire did not hide its intentions. Women were expected to be obedient vessels, carrying secrets for men, carrying children for families, carrying guilt for society. Those who disobeyed, even by rumor, had to be broken in ways that echoed through entire provinces. The horse rack was psychological warfare carved out of lumber. The crank turned again, twice. Her spine bowed until it resembled the same arc the executioners were creating with the rope. Each turn took her body in 4 directions at once, unraveling her from the core. Her shoulders burned like hot iron, her thighs stretched to their limits, fibers tearing with muffled snaps she could feel more than hear. Her breath hitched, then sputtered. Imperial officials often describe this stage as the revelation point, a moment when the victim's mind opened like a wound, a moment when judge, executioner, and state merged into a single omnipotent force. They believed torture purged dishonesty. They believed bones made truth easier to extract. They believed this was order. But the truth is simpler, yet darker. Torture like this was never about verifying guilt. It was about displaying power, controlling narratives, crushing dissent before it could become contagious. Lin Suying groaned, not a scream, not yet. Her voice came out strained, as if pulled from deep within her chest. The executioner tightened the rope slowly, methodically. They always did. Sudden agony caused the body to break too quickly, but gradual stretching forced the victim to participate in their own destruction, one breath at a time. Her vision blurred. Sweat dripped onto the wood beneath her cheeks. The smell rose again. Damp fear, heavy and sour, seeping upward with her heat. She couldn't escape it. It filled her lungs, her mind, her thoughts. It became the only constant in a world unraveling by the second. And the magistrate watched it all with the serenity of a man admiring a painting. This was the Empire's idea of perfect order, Women bent until they broke. Bodies turned into warnings. Fear woven into daily life so deeply that people inhaled it without noticing. Another turn of the crank. Her back arched higher, her pelvis shifting under tension that no human anatomy was designed to endure. A sharp, wet crack rippled inside her hips, soft but unmistakable. Not loud enough for the soldiers to react, but loud enough for her world to tilt. History records the horse rack as a device of interrogation. But here, right here, you see its real purpose: to make the victim see herself as the state wanted her to be. Fragile, powerless, breakable. And Lin Sujing was just beginning to understand that her suffering was not a punishment, it was a message. A message meant for everyone except her. When the crack inside Lin Suying's pelvis echoed through her body, the executioners didn't stop. They didn't even slow. They glanced at each other the way carpenters might examine a stubborn plank, just checking structural limits. The magistrate nodded, his expression unchanged. And in that moment, the damp smell rising from the wooden beam seemed to thicken, as if history itself exhaled. Women had split here before. Women would split here again, and the empire counted on it. Suying's breath came in fast, panicked bursts. Not screams, just raw survival. The ropes pulled her upward and outward, tightening her torso against the beam until her ribs lifted like cage bars forced open by invisible hands. Her shoulders trembled, her thighs quivered uncontrollably. Her lungs fought for space they no longer had. But beneath all that terror, a strange realization flickered. She was not the first. Her torment was part of a lineage, a punished inheritance. And the old, damp smell suggested something even more sinister. This place was designed to absorb the fear of every woman stretched across it, storing their last breaths like offerings. Historians often sanitize this. They call it interrogation, justice, social correction. Yet they ignore the truth. This was performance, a ritual of humiliation designed to frighten thousands who would never witness it firsthand. Word of mouth did the real work. The crackling tension, the way a woman's back arched beyond nature, the whispered accounts of pelvises splitting open, these details traveled farther than any soldier ever could. Another turn. The ropes yanked her hips downward while her arms were drawn toward the horizon behind her. Her back curved in an impossible arc. For a heartbeat, just a heartbeat, she could swear her spine hovered on the brink of snapping, and the fear surged so violently that it overpowered even the pain. This is where most victims broke, historians say, not physically, but psychologically, because the horse rack held a cruel secret, one final revelation the empire depended on. It wasn't designed to kill swiftly, it was designed to make the victim feel their own body turning into an enemy. And then came the shock, one the records rarely mention, one the magistrates pretended not to see. As her body stretched, something else happened. Her mind revolted, memory sharpened, colors blazed, and the world tilted sideways. She remembered her mother's hairpins, her father's laugh, the silk threads she used to dye in the river. Everything vivid, everything unbearably alive. Pain does that. It amplifies the smallest fragment of humanity just before trying to crush it. But what no one expected, not the magistrate, not the soldiers, not the state, was the moment Lin Suying stopped begging. Her trembling grew still, her breaths even into slow, deliberate draws. Her eyes, swollen with tears, fixed not on her torturers, but on the sky above the courtyard wall. Calm, defiant, unbroken. It terrified them more than any scream, because the woman who stops pleading becomes unpredictable, dangerous. She disrupts the ritual. She cracks the illusion of the empire's total control. The assistant hesitated. Even the rope handlers faltered. The damp smell of fear, usually hers, seemed to shift, drifting toward them. That was the shock moment the Empire never accounted for. A tortured woman reclaiming the narrative, even while pulled apart at the seams. The magistrate responded the only way he knew. He ordered the crank turned again. And this time, the ropes jerked with violent force, sending a ripple through her entire frame. Her ribs pushed outward, her spine arched into a crescent that defied anatomy. A thin, searing tear surged down her inner thigh, hot as fire. She gasped, choking on the stale, damp scent rising from the beam, fear becoming her only oxygen. But beneath all that terror, a strange realization flickered. She was not the first. Her torment was part of a lineage, a punished inheritance, and the old damp smell suggested something even more sinister. This place was designed to absorb the fear of every woman stretched across it, storing their last breaths like offerings. But here, stretched to the edge of ruin, Lin Su-ying held something they could not break: a refusal, a silent rebellion. A truth that the horse rack, this monstrous instrument carved from wood and arrogance, was never meant to reveal. And now, the consequences of that defiance were about to unfold. When Lin Su-ying refused to break, the courtyard changed. Not in noise, not in movement, but in atmosphere. Something subtle, unsettling, a chef the executioners felt in their fingertips. The damp smell that had trailed every torture, every breath, every whispered confession, it no longer belonged to her. It hovered around them instead, clinging to their sleeves, seeping into their composure. Fear had switched hosts, and Empire officials were never trained for that. The magistrate swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly. He motioned for the crank to pause, not out of mercy. He simply needed a moment to steady the trembling that spread through the courtyard like an invisible shockwave. No one wrote about this in official records. No imperial handbook acknowledged it. But every executioner knew. When a victim stopped fearing death, the ritual of power collapsed. Lin Su-ying was half-conscious, barely tethered to reality. Her body trembled with the violent pull of the ropes, her ribs blade tight, her hips stretched beyond human design. Pain raged through her in tidal waves, but her eyes held something devastating. A calm that did not belong here. A calm that challenged the very purpose of the horse rack. Because this device, this monstrous beam of political theater, required terror to function. Without fear, it became nothing more than wood and rope. And the officials surrounding her now felt the truth press against their skin like a warning. History remembers what fear destroys, but it forgets the quieter truth. Fear can turn inward, back toward the hands that wield it. The magistrate ordered the procedure to continue, but this time, his command cracked at the edges. The soldiers hesitated. Their hands slipped on the rope. The damp smell clung thicker to the air, swirling between them like breath from an unseen mouth. And in that tense silence, something remarkable unfolded. Women from the nearby quarters whispered. Servant girls paused in their chores. A guard near the gate shifted, uncomfortable. Small, silent rebellions, so subtle the magistrate couldn't punish them, yet loud enough to ripple through the courtyard's bones. This was the aftermath the Empire feared, the moment torture stopped being a symbol of domination and became a mirror reflecting its own fragility. The horse rack didn't kill Lin Su-ying that morning. Many victims died quickly. She didn't. She clung to life long enough to be untied, carried away, and erased from official memory. But not from living memory, not from the women who saw her resilience, not from the whispers that followed the magistrate for years, not from the small crack she left in the Empire's illusion of invulnerability. Every system built on cruelty carries the seeds of its own undoing, and every act of violence leaves behind echoes that outlive kings, dynasties, empires. That damp smell rising from the beam, it did not fade when the rack was retired. It clung to the walls of old storage rooms, to abandoned punishment halls, to the testimonies that scholars tried to suppress. Fear became a relic, passed down, analyzed, exposed. And today, as we look back at this brutality with sober eyes, we see not a singular torture device, but an entire structure of control. A society where women's bodies were rewritten as instruments of obedience, where silence was demanded, where suffering became statecraft. But here is the part history books often soften. These systems did not disappear, they transformed. Whenever a government demands loyalty over humanity, whenever a voice is punished for speaking truth, whenever society asks women to shrink, bend, or break to preserve order, the horse rack breathes again in new forms. Which raises the question we must confront today, a question we can no longer ignore. How many modern structures still stretch us quietly towards obedience? As we close this investigation, take a moment, a real moment to breathe past the horror and into the lesson. Lin Su-ying's story is not just a historical account. It is a warning shaped in wood, sharpened over centuries, still echoing in the systems we navigate now. And if these stories matter to you, if the buried truths, the forgotten victims, the dark machinery of history deserve to be brought into the light, then stay with us, subscribe to Crimson Archive, support the work, and help ensure that these echoes are never lost to silence again. Because some histories must be heard before they're repeated.